Something major just happened in Burkina Faso. But no headlines, no hashtags. It flew completely under the radar. Behind closed doors, the government made a bold, unexpected move. One that could reshape the nation's future and send shockwaves across the continent. What exactly are they planning? Why is no one talking about it? And what does it mean for Africa as a whole? Let's break it down. The recent bold and well-coordinated actions made by Burkina Faso's administration have the potential to completely change the country's future. Without outside assistance, the nation handled justice, security, education, and economic transformation in a single council meeting. It wasn't standard procedure. It was the subdued beginning of a national revolution with ramifications for the entire continent. There was little attention when the council was announced. However, it left behind a set of choices that looked more like a strategic reset than standard governance. Not a reaction, not a metaphor. These were operational changes, the kind that indicate a nation is not just aware of its issues, but is also making the decision to address them. Every document authorized on that day bears the burden of a government attempting to rebuild its physical and mental presence, not through coercion, but by construction. And the locations that feel most forgotten are the best places to start. The land is the first step. Some areas of Burkina Faso's northern region, especially the Sahel, have not been developed in decades. Not because they are unsuitable, but rather because they have been enmeshed in complicated property disputes, bureaucratic red tape, and most importantly, the terrifying influence of armed groups. The state didn't hesitate to negotiate this time. A 100-hectare zone in Dori was designated as an area of urgent public utility by a decree it issued. That one word changed everything. It made it possible to proceed with a long-delayed project by opening the legal framework. The building of a science and technology training and research facility, along with a university residence. This had nothing to do with classroom wall construction. In an area where presence frequently fades, this was about establishing permanence. The sounds of lectures, lab equipment, and students figuring out their futures are about to fill a place that was once characterized by silence. And the presence of law follows naturally after the presence of minds has been established. Courts are typically the first to close when disputes get more intense. Judges step aside. Cases become frozen. The concept of legal protection itself falls apart. This occurred in various regions of Burkina Faso. However, a decision has now been made to turn that spiral around. The government has approved not just the return of judicial personnel, but a material reinforcement of the justice system itself. That means restoring the High Court, rehabilitating the Nuna prison, planning and studying the feasibility of new courts in Bogande and Tugan. In these regions, courtrooms are more than legal infrastructure. They're an antidote to fear. People don't just want safety. They want a system they can rely on when things go wrong. They want rules they believe in, not just rifles they duck from. It's one thing to have a police force. It's another thing entirely to have a working justice system that holds power accountable and gives citizens a path back to dignity. But speaking of the police, they weren't left out either. Burkina Faso's internal security challenges aren't abstract. They're daily, real, and at times overwhelming. But instead of announcing flashy troop surges or temporary deployments, the government took a more deliberate approach by rethinking who gets to protect the country. A fresh wave of police recruitment was authorized. But this isn't your standard expansion. This time, the recruitment categories were tailored, targeted, and symbolic. They include commissioned officers, technicians, specialized skill holders, women, individuals connected to past national sacrifice, like families of fallen fighters and former volunteer defenders. The message here is subtle but firm. Security isn't just a job for the traditional few. It's a shared responsibility, one that needs diverse hands, real representation, and repaired trust between the state and the people. You don't rebuild public confidence with uniforms alone. You rebuild it by who wears them. Not all progress is visible from the outside. Some of it takes place in paperwork, in rulings that never make headlines. One such action included lifting a silent, powerful monopoly that had gone unchecked for too long: the exclusive control over infrastructure quality testing. For years, one state lab held the last word on public construction standards. But today, the council has opened that space. No more sole authority. No more unchecked influence. The field is being extended to embrace competition, efficiency, and better outcomes. It may appear like a technical shift, but in reality, it's a major political statement. The state is ready to disperse control and demand outcomes, not rituals. And then came a decision that binds economy to identity: the formal recognition and empowerment of the Faso Abattoir Agency as a public economic agency. Livestock has traditionally been a backbone of Burkina Faso's rural existence. But for too long, the processing and revenues were handled far from the hands that raised the animals. That is altered by this directive. It provides the agency with instruments to grow meat production and export, the legal ability to operate autonomously, and the platform to promote food sovereignty at home. Feeding the country is no longer the exclusive goal. The goal is to guarantee that the country manages the entire food supply chain, from markets to herders. Not all of these rulings are merely updates to the policy. They play chess on a complicated board. Peace is repositioned for long-term control of the narrative, the economy, and the public's trust in their government, not for short-term glory. Why now, though, is the query, if this is what was done? Why the timing? This pressing need? This fire? We'll find out about that next. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Rewiring a nation is not something you do randomly. Not with this much on the line. Not when every institution bears the weight of tardiness and every district bears the memory of instability. The government of Burkina Faso did not make these decisions out of comfort. They were not merely survivalists. They came out of necessity. This has nothing to do with repairing a sinking ship. The goal was to guide it to a place it had never ventured to before. 3 pressure points must all converge simultaneously for you to comprehend why these particular modifications were made at this time. A growing need for national authorship, ideological urgency, and territorial fragility. In a number of its eastern and northern regions, Burkina Faso is still under siege. Not just towns are in danger. They are completely occupied, contested, or depopulated. Entire towns have been uprooted. Institutions are no longer visible on the map. A rumor that many hope is still true is echoed by the state in some regions. However, the Traoré administration recognizes a crucial fact. Silence won't help you regain a nation. For this reason, visibility and presence are the focus of every recent choice. State presence, not only military presence. A courtroom is more than just a place for lawyers. It is evidence of the state's continued presence in that area. A school does more than merely teach. Families are anchored by it. The economy is not the only benefit of a meat processing plant. People are drawn back into reputable networks supported by the state. The geography of warfare is what makes these measures so urgent. The state does not merely use force in response to militants destroying police stations. In response, it substitutes something else for them. Something more substantial than bullets: a future. The timing has another aspect to it: political unification. It wasn't a quiet election that brought Ibrahim Traoré to power. He rose to prominence amid turbulent times, riding a wave of annoyance at indecision, tardiness, and dependence. Expectations rose along with that, the kind that doesn't wait for gradual reforms to happen for years. There is tremendous pressure to produce something tangible, quick, and irrevocable. It is evident in the way the administration gets around long-standing obstacles. Is land being declared urgently useful to the public? It's more than just land. Cutting through red tape is the goal, removing government monopolies in public works projects. That's an attempt to remove a bureaucracy that stifles advancement. This estimate is made by the government in every action. Our credibility will either quietly disappear later, or we will act courageously now. No intermediate ground exists. They are aware of it. Brilliant people have always existed in Burkina Faso. However, the nation has been compelled to take guidance from foreign consultants, funders, structural transformation programs, and peacekeeping operations for decades, which frequently maintain peace for everyone but Burkina Faso. The state is now crafting its narrative, which is different. It is not merely a budgetary decision when the government decides to finance court improvements without requesting international assistance. It is a declaration of authorship that is symbolic. It's not simply about meeting quotas when it incorporates former volunteers and the relatives of the fallen into national police recruitment. In the absence of the state, it is an act of moral reparation to those who filled the void. Regaining local value is reflected even in the plan to boost domestic meat processing, should cease importing foreign solutions and exporting raw materials, to preserve Burkina Faso's property within Burkina Faso. A larger vision drives these decisions. It is a post-colonial state that is no longer slanting. The issue of continental perspective is another. More individuals than ever before are keeping a close eye on Burkina Faso throughout Africa, not only because of the political changes, but also because of the leadership's self-assured rejection of outdated structures. Burkina Faso is displaying a very clear stance, whether it is by turning away from Western financing sources, leaving ECOWAS together with Mali and Niger, or publicly questioning the value of international organizations. Now we make our own decision. However, gestures lack substance and are meaningless. This April reform package is important because of this. It gives the nation's ideological stance actual legal, policy, and infrastructure support. We don't just criticize global power structures, it states. We're creating substitutes for them. Additionally, there is a more subdued reality that cannot be disregarded. Time is not a luxury in Burkina Faso. For rebels, any delay is an advantage. For those who claim the state is incapable of providing, every bureaucratic bottleneck is a propaganda win. The government isn't waiting for perfection because of this. It's choosing presence over paralysis, launching what it has, and improving along the way. No policy can be evaluated based only on its documentation. However, one thing is evident. These choices weren't taken lightly. They emerged as a result of pressure, urgency, and a leadership that is aware that its people, detractors, and a continent yearn for audacity are watching. These reforms represent a wager that rapid state construction may surpass state disintegration. Violence can be outpaced by that visibility. Through service rather than occupation, that control can be regained. The second issue is, what will these choices change now that they are in motion? Because making decisions is one thing. Another is impact. Making decisions is the first step. However, the aftermath is where true power is found. In both the obvious and hidden ways that those choices affect a nation's day-to-day operations. The April 16th reforms are not merely directives from the top down for Burkina Faso. They serve as a pattern for subtly re-establishing the state-citizen connection. One area, one industry, and one organization at a time. People are actually waiting for facts, not pronouncements, after years of trauma, skepticism, and betrayal. And this time, the proof might be on the way. Let us start where the disintegration of the state was most obvious. The periphery, particularly in the east and north. These areas have been excluded from development plans and plagued by terror for years. Because of geography and geopolitics, the locals have lived with the perception that they have been forgotten. However, the state is physically and visually returning to these front lines as a result of the changes that were implemented. In areas like Dori, university institutions are being built for purposes other than science degrees. It has to do with present psychology. No press conference can ever say what concrete buildings can. Once more, we're here. We're not going anywhere. And everything is altered by that feeling of revitalized presence. Individuals who had previously only considered escaping to Ghana, Uwaga, or any other safer location might start to consider remaining. About starting a little business, taking their kids to school, cultivating crops, and going home. People begin to think that life can resume once the state arrives. Buildings are not the only things destroyed by conflict. Opportunities are also destroyed. Futures are erased. Additionally, exile, armed organizations, or economic despair were the only apparent futures for many young Burkinabéans, particularly in rural and war-affected areas. When young people see fresh paths to dignity, that changes. In Kaya, a young mechanic who believed that migration was the only way to advance might now learn about a police recruitment campaign that is explicitly looking for technical positions. In Fadanagoma, a widow who lost her husband to war may now be aware that there is a quota for relatives of the fallen, and a good excuse to return to state service. These are practical bridges that pull individuals out of limbo and reintegrate them into the national goal. They are not only symbolic gestures. Inclusion has taken the place of seclusion, and there might be recognition now where there was sorrow. Trust takes time to rebuild after years of institutional failure. However, when people engage with functional items, it does begin to rebuild. People don't require a campaign to inform them that the system is back in place if a court is established in an area that hasn't had a judge in 4 years. They witness a case being filed, a land issue being resolved, or a conflict being averted. It also adheres. Parents don't need a state lecture on reform if a university campus in the Sahel region opens on schedule, has real lecturers, and has operational facilities. Rather than going into exile, they just watch their kids enter classrooms. In Burkina Faso, that is currently the actual currency of change. Visible and verifiable service provision. Every operational courtroom, newly constructed campus wall, and open recruitment announcement all convey a message that is more powerful than any words. Once more, the state is real. The way these rulings are eroding the institutional monopolies that have held the nation hostage is among their most subtle effects. When a single public lab dominated the building regulation industry, this exclusivity led to quiet gatekeeping in addition to inefficiencies. The kind that hindered innovation, impeded growth, and increased expenditures. Eliminating that control makes it possible for private-public partnerships to avoid bureaucratic pitfalls, for projects to proceed more quickly, and for audits to be cleaner. The pace of the country's progress might be completely altered by one reform alone. Roads are constructed more quickly. Bridges are examined by several people. There are fewer hiding places for corruption, and eventually people start to take notice. Faith in systems is restored when roads survive longer, buildings cease falling, and contracts become competitive. There has long been a paradox in Burkina Faso. Resources are abundant, yet control is lacking. Production and profit have frequently been separated, particularly in the fields of agriculture and cattle. Herders and farmers created value, but they hardly ever seized it. The government is indicating more than simply an improvement in meat processing by reorganizing the Faso Abattoirs Agency. It states that value chains must benefit the nation before they may benefit exporters. Hands from Burkina Faso raise and terminate that. Institutions in Burkina Faso are required to distribute and own. This is an emotional argument as well as an economic one. It conveys to rural communities, particularly those reliant on cattle rearing, that they are more than just a source of raw materials. They are at last included in a national economic cycle. People have an incentive to protect the system when they have an interest in it. These measures won't bring about changes right away. However, their transmissions are already rather audible. In bus terminals, marketplaces, mosques, and villages, they'd murmur something potent. The state is making another attempt, but it is not preaching or performing. And one of the most hazardous things for any insurgency, and the most valuable thing for any government, is that slight change in public opinion, from complete cynicism to cautious hope. Because the state eventually transforms into something else totally once people start to think it's worth relying on. A state worth defending. And Burkina Faso is currently at that point. On the verge of a much more significant redefinition, not merely the brink of transformation. What do you think can prevent Burkina Faso from evolving? What do you think about these new changes? Are you prepared for Burkina Faso to change? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.